yourself as well. That would be great. All right. Again, thank you also very much for um, joining us this morning for a very important conversation about Israel and about my most recent trip to Israel and Michael's most recent trip to Israel as well. So let me just, start back from the beginning as to the importance of this conversation and the importance of the trip that I attended with the Wider Bridge. So I, was joining a Wider Bridge a few weeks ago on this trip, which the purpose was to really get an understanding as to the challenges that our siblings over in Israel are going through right now in a post-October 7th world, but especially under the lens of the LGBTQ community. And so we had the remarkable opportunity to meet with tremendous leaders, both civic leaders and folks who are running either nonprofits or NGOs within Israel that supports the LGBTQ community. And so I started off by describing that when we first landed, we had the opportunity to meet with one of the first transgender Israeli soldiers who spoke about his own experience serving in the IDF and what that means and how he, um, really had to fight for equality um, with, equal access and having members of the LGBTQ community serving in the IDF. We then had the opportunity to meet with a wonderful family who owns an Ethiopian restaurant in Israel and got to hear a little bit about their journey and their family's journey to Israel, back home, as they described, which was very enlightening for me, especially because after October 7th in the United States, we heard um, this horrible narrative about Israel being only white and that everything that's happening over there is white supremacist. But we heard a very different story from this woman about how, as an Ethiopian and as a Jewish woman, that Israel is her home place and that she was very grateful and thankful that her family was able to make this long journey um, back home and how she uses food to tell her story, to tell the story of her family, but also to share that Israel is this true um, melting pot of a country that is filled with many complexities and many challenges, um, but that she and her family are still a part of this story and do not want their stories to be erased. We also have the opportunity to journey into the South, which I think for many of us was probably um, not only the most impactful, but very difficult. We had the opportunity to go to the Nova site, where we saw firsthand the damage that was done on October 7th. Um, the Nova Festival site right now is filled with placards of the many people that attended the festival, some of whom were, taken into captivity, many of whom lost their lives that day. And it is just a moving monument, really, of what happened that day, but also of resilience. Just down the road from the site, we were able to see a museum almost of cars that were damaged and shot up by Hamas, and learn about the stories of the folks that were involved and trying to save their own lives and trying to save the lives of their friends. And a couple miles away, we went to a kibbutz, and got to hear their stories and hear firsthand stories, really, of folks who were attacked by Hamas, and got to walk through the kibbutz and see really firsthand the damage that was done and learn their stories. And for me, throughout that day, the one story that really stood out to me um, was walking into one of the homes that was attacked, and seeing the damage, the bullet holes everywhere. But also, they had a screen and a monitor playing footage from that day from the a victim of Hamas's attack. Um, and the video was just on loop, and you can hear the voice of this person who ultimately was murdered by Hamas. And hearing her pleading for help in Hebrew, hearing her, describing to her followers who she was live streaming on, I believe, Instagram or TikTok, hearing her describing the horror and how she just wanted to live. And this was a very young person, someone who moved into the kibbutz uh, to start a new life and to be away from the city and to be in intentional community and to witness this horror and to have her life ripped away was truly just, it was heartbreaking, to be honest. And I still struggle with the words, as you may be able to tell, because it's one thing to see something on TV. And Michael is a reporter, and so I know he's often put in this position, but to report and to see the reports, but it's another thing to actually be there and to see um, the sheer atrocity that everyone experienced on October 7th. But then we also had the remarkable opportunity to meet with several members of the LGBTQ community. Um, Meetings that stood out to me were meeting with the transgender community in Israel and learning about their struggles and learning about um, what it takes for them to stand up for their own rights within the government, but also alliances that they have been able to forge within their own community. Um, we also have the opportunity to meet with the Jerusalem Open House, who I know spoke at Beit Mishpacha a couple months ago, and hear about their journey, but also about the many people that they serve, not just the LGBTQ community. Neely Madera, who is the CEO of Jerusalem Open House, described how they reach a wide community, even folks who are part of the Orthodox community who may need their services for either STI and STD testing or mental health evaluation, and they're afraid to go get those services within their own community out of fear of either retribution or folks within their community, finding them out. And so these are very important NGOs within Israeli society. And I would say the common thing that we heard amongst all the individuals that we met with is the need for funding. And that many of them, which I guess is a blessing, receive funding from the government. But as we know, governments can change very quickly. And funding can be, redirected very quickly. And so a part of this conversation that we're having today, and then I'll turn it over to Michael shortly, is to give, not only this update, but also to kind of think about how, as we, as Beit Mishpacha, as a community, we can support our siblings over in Israel who are needing it right now, especially within the LGBTQ community. And so, with that, and I know we are very behind schedule, I will stop speaking and I will turn it over to Michael to give a little update about his time there, especially during significant October 7th anniversary.
Great. Thank you so much, Joshua. Thank you so much, Bet Mish, for the opportunity to speak with y'all this morning. I'll try to keep my comments and observations short and concise. I know we're behind schedule, so I will do my best. So I was on assignment in Israel from October 2nd through October 14th. Initially, my trip was supposed to be 7 days, but my flight out of Ben Gurion was canceled due to, quote, unforeseen circumstances, which is never something that fills you with confidence, shall we say. So I ended up spending 4 extra days on the ground in Israel and flew out on October 13th and returned to Dulles the next day. So just the logistics of me getting to Israel were incredibly challenging because there was an active war going on at the time. Hostilities with Lebanon had begun just a few weeks before I was supposed to arrive. My flight through Europe had been canceled, so I had to go through Dubai. I spent a night in Dubai, which wouldn't have been possible even a few years ago because the Abraham Accords had not been signed at that point. So I ended up spending the night in Dubai and then after flying there on Emirates and then finally landed at Ben Gurion on a Fly Dubai flight about 3:30 in the afternoon on October 4th. And even before leaving Ben Gurion, you felt just how heavy the situation was in Israel, and you just saw signs of the hostages everywhere. Even before you entered the customs hall at Ben Gurion, you saw the signs. There was a public art display, which Joshua hopefully will show in a second, saying "Bring them home now" with the dog tags that have become so symbolic of the effort to get the hostages out of Gaza. So that's literally the first thing I saw even before I went through customs in Ben Gurion. And then from there, went to Hostage Square, saw all of the memorials and everything that's been set up there. And that was really the first time that, um, you know, we journal it. And Joshua showing the picture that I just mentioned of going into Ben Gurion. So at Hostage Square, yeah, I mean, I saw the situation. I saw what was going on there. This picture in particular, there was a young child playing the piano there, and it was really quiet. It was Friday afternoon, just before Shabbat was starting, and it was just really quiet. Um, I became emotional, and that happened several times while I was on the ground in Israel. So the next day, which was Saturday, the 5th of October, I went to the Nova Music Festival site. And initially, I wasn't sure if it was safe enough to go there, but somebody that I met at Hostage Square said it's okay to go there. So I went there, and within an hour of leaving Tel Aviv, a little over an hour of leaving Tel Aviv, I was there. And these are the red flowers that are set up in the campground where the festival had happened. And the eeriest and most startling part of that experience is that you could actually hear the bombing, the airstrikes in Gaza because it's so close. And I was driving back to Tel Aviv, which again is just over an hour, and I stopped to have something to eat at one of the restaurants before you get on the main road back to Tel Aviv. And I heard the airstrikes in northern Gaza, and the ground beneath my feet shook. I've never experienced that before, and it was incredibly unsettling. And then an hour later, I was back in Tel Aviv, and it's as if everything was fine. It wasn't fine, but people were on the beach. It was a beautiful sunny Saturday afternoon. It was still warm because it's October. So that was very unsettling to me, and I can talk about that in a little bit. So the 6th of October came. That's my first real work day. So I did some reporting while I was there, walked around Tel Aviv with our colleague George Afni. That picture that Joshua just showed is the mural near Hostage Square of the Bibas family. And we all know what happened, unfortunately, to them just a couple of weeks ago. So that was one of the many very visible reminders of the situation in Israel. So October 7th comes, it was a Monday, Tel Aviv was really quiet. And then at about 11 o'clock in the morning, Hamas launched rockets from Gaza. My phone, the Sotar app started going off about 11 o'clock in the morning. I didn't have to seek shelter because I was far enough out of the danger area, but the rockets were intercepted in South Tel Aviv, and I could hear the interception from the Iron Dome. I knew what it was. It was still pretty frightening. I went out to the balcony a few minutes later, and there was a woman across the street that was clearly distressed about what had happened. But an hour later, I was at the coffee shop, and life goes on. So later that day, I went to Hostage Square. The IDF had limited the number of folks who could gather in a public space in Tel Aviv. I think it was 2,000. So folks had gathered at Hostage Square to watch the October 7th commemoration that had happened in one of the main parks in Tel Aviv. And shortly before that started, there was another missile alert. The Houthis had launched a missile from Yemen. It was intercepted in space, but the um, the alert system had started going off again. We didn't have to seek shelter where we were, but everybody's phone had started going off. So that was just yet another reminder of the situation in which Israel had found was in at that time. So the service went off. I went home back to the apartment where I was staying in Tel Aviv. We did a Wider Bridge October 7th chat, I guess you could call it. So I was on Zoom from our balcony about 9 o'clock at night in Tel Aviv. Went to bed about 10:30. It was absolutely exhausted. It was a very, very trying day. And then about 11 o'clock at night, the phone started going off again. And that was Hezbollah launched missiles towards an IDF base just north of where I was. I was, again, just out of the area that I needed to go seek shelter, but I heard the interceptions. The building in which I was staying shook. It was extremely scary. I've never felt that before. But as soon as it starts, it's very dramatic, but then it's over, and then somehow you just, you know, get on with it, I suppose. But I just don't understand how anybody could ever get used to that. But that was all in one day, and I got a real sense of just what Israelis have been dealing with over the last since October 7th and even in previous wars and conflicts and so forth. So the next day I went to Jerusalem. I went to Jerusalem Open House. I took a walk into the old city. It was very quiet. Usually it's very bustling, but it was really, really quiet, eerily quiet. And then I went to a memorial service for I'm just looking up his name here. I have it in my notes here. Sagi Golan, who was the gay IDF major who was killed fighting Hamas at one of the kibbutz in southern Israel on October 7th. His fiance successfully lobbied the Israeli Knesset to pass a law that recognized same-sex couples who were in the IDF for survivor benefits and so forth. So they had Sagi's memorial service in Herzliya, just north of Tel Aviv. So that's where I ended that day. The following day, I went to Beersheba. Went to Beersheba, Pride House of Beersheba. Spoke with the one of the folks there. The bus station where a terrorist attack had happened a couple of days before, where several folks were killed, is maybe a 10-minute drive from where Pride House Beersheba is. So I saw that, the bus station, like there's restaurants and things, but there was a makeshift memorial. Um, so that was that Wednesday. Then Thursday, I had meetings and so forth in Tel Aviv. And then Friday was Yom Kippur. So everything shut down, but it was really, really quiet. And I think everybody was very happy with the fact, was quite pleased with the fact that it was incredibly quiet, given just how dramatic that previous week had been. So Yom Kippur ended the following Saturday night, and then Sunday I interviewed a historian, Uzi Evad at his apartment in North Tel Aviv, and then it went to the Israeli Transgender Association. I interviewed a gay Druze man, and then I flew out that Monday afternoon and made it was back in DC about 20 hours later. So that's a bit of my itinerary. And and I've traveled, I've reported from many places around the world in my time at the Blade, and it's always important for us to, if we have a chance to go to any country, to get on the ground and talk to folks about, allow them to share their stories with us, to talk about, what they're dealing with. The government, the geopolitical backdrop certainly is part of that, but from my perspective, it's far more important for us to go to where folks in the community are, and to talk about, to allow them to share their stories with me and with the Blade about, how they're dealing with a certain situation, what's life like for them. And so being in Israel on the anniversary of October 7th was incredibly important. Yes, it's certainly a very important geopolitical moment, in the history of Israel, as well as the response from the United States and so forth. But ultimately, it was really, really important for us to actually have the chance, to be on the ground in Israel, to talk to community members who have been so um, have been impacted by this horrific day so horribly, and they're still dealing with the aftermath of that horrific day more than a year and a half later. So it was just really important for us to go to Israel and actually talk with folks. And it's also incredibly important for us as well to share the Palestinian perspective on what has been happening since October 7th. Before I left to go to Israel, I had a chance to talk to two LGBTQ Palestinians. One was from a city, just a small city just outside of Ramallah in the West Bank. A second one, her family came from Jerusalem. So it was really important for us to, share their perspective with with Blade readers. And then also one of my colleagues after I came back spoke with a queer queer activists who had done some work in Gaza since October 7th as part of the humanitarian efforts. So it's, these perspectives are also just as important as hearing from folks inside Israel. So I'll leave it at that. That's a rough overview of the work that I did in Israel and what my experience is like.
Thank you so much, Michael, for sharing your experience. And again, I think, for me and hearing your story, just how different our
Yeah.
experiences were. I mean, excuse me, you were very much a part of, in a war zone.
Yeah.
And, constantly we're getting those alerts. Our experience was somewhat different. Of course, we were there, excuse me, during the ceasefire, and we were able to actually be in hostage square when a few of the hostages were released. And so it was this weird sense of peace, but the unknown, right? Like anything could happen and anything could change within a second. Um, so I guess I would like to open it up for questions for anyone on the Zoom. You can throw them into the chat and I can read them off. But I just want to start off with, um, as a gay man, being in Israel at such a heightened time,
Mhm.
and not knowing, where, things change from one second to the next. How did you find comfort? How did you find hope, within that situation? And also, if you could share a little bit with us, with the people that you met with.
Mhm.
Um, I certainly know that when I was there, I was awestruck by the resilience of everyone, and everyone's still having joy, even though it clearly is a difficult situation. So how did you personally just continue to have that hope and continue your mission while you were there?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Thank you. in some weird and frankly messed up way, there was almost like I almost had a routine every day. I stayed near Hilton Beach in Tel Aviv, and it was October, so the weather was still fairly warm. The Mediterranean was very warm, so one of the ways that I tried to stay sane, and it didn't always work, but I tried desperately. I went to the beach about 7 o'clock every morning. I would sit there and read, like, just update, read the news from the night before, just to know what was going on, what happened, and then I would go for a swim. That's how I started my day. And it was, you can call it self-care, you can call it mental health or whatever, but that's just how I started my day. And then I would go back to the apartment, have my coffee, whatever, and then just, plan my day accordingly. I say um, all of that happened against the backdrop of just not knowing what was going to happen each day. October 7th is, there were three missile alerts in Tel Aviv, and in Tel Aviv, you don't get them that often, but at the time, um, they were pretty common. I mean, Haifa was getting rockets from Lebanon multiple times a day. Tel Aviv was a little bit more um, away from that situation, but still, there was always it was always in the back of your mind, are we going to get rocket alerts? Are we going to have to run for shelter? And October 7th was the day that we had three. And then there was a fourth, the one a couple hours after my flight back to Dubai left. I found out that there was another missile attack. I think that was the Houthis, but I didn't know this till I was in Dubai. So that was always in the back of your mind. You wake up in the morning, today's another day, but is this the day where I'm going to have to, run for cover, basically? And I think Israelis have been dealing with that for over a year, and even more so depending on where you are in the country. So that's a very unsettling thing. I think a lot of folks in the United States just have no concept of what that is like. It certainly was very jarring for me. I had never experienced that before. Um, after the Hamas rockets reached Tel Aviv on October 7th, within an hour, I was buying coffee at the coffee shop. It was just kind of like, okay, this happened. You just kind of get on with it. And I think that's really part of the Israeli psyche, you just plow forward and just do the best you can. But just beneath that, there's so much trauma and there's so much pain and there's so much heartache about, especially from what happened in October 7th, but just the fact that so many folks are still in Gaza, so many innocent people on both sides. Again, we can't discount what's happening in Gaza with Palestinian civilians who are just caught up in this horrific situation over which they have no control. So there's just a lot of collective trauma. There's a lot of collective heartache for what's going on. But at the same time, you kind of have to continue your life. And there's something inspiring about that, but there's something really disturbing about that as well. And I go back to when I left the restaurant where the ground shook beneath my feet from the airstrike in Gaza. An hour later, I was driving up the seafront in Tel Aviv on this beautiful Saturday afternoon. The beaches were packed with people. Like, it was just a beautiful sunny Saturday afternoon in Tel Aviv. And an hour before that, I was feeling the ground shake beneath my feet because of an Israeli airstrike. That was incredibly disturbing for me, that juxtaposition, and I still can't really get over that. But that's just the reality of what's going on in Israel right now, or at least when I was there. I mean, the ceasefire happened after I left, but um, it's dystopian in so many ways. But on one hand, Israelis are trying their best to carry on, but just beneath the surface, there's so much wrong. And in terms of moments of joy, I guess, I don't know if joy is a good way to describe it, but like I did go to a gay bar a couple of times. People were there, people were trying to have a good time. I remember my first morning in Tel Aviv when I was sitting on the beach the first time, reading the news and going for my swim. I overheard a group of there were two younger men and a woman. They had obviously that come to the beach after being out all night, and I kind of heard them talking about like how they were out all night, and you could smell the alcohol. Like obviously they had been out partying. So I just kind of like was kind of eavesdropping over their conversation. So I guess like that's another moment of, and there's like drones and helicopters going up and down the coast. But they're still sitting here talking about their night out, and they were still drinking on the beach at 7 o'clock in the morning, 7:30 in the morning. And so that was another example of, kind of how life goes on. It on one hand, again, it's inspiring, but on the other hand, I think it's just sheer grit. I mean, what else are you going to do in the situation? So I had a lot of experiences like that. And then I guess my very trivial moment of joy. I love pomegranate juice. I absolutely love pomegranate juice. And pomegranates were coming into season when I was in Israel in October, and I just absolutely love fresh pomegranate juice. And there was a juice stand right across from my Airbnb, and I went there almost every day and had just the most amazing pomegranate juice. So it may seem a little trivial, but that was a small moment of joy, I guess, just having that wonderful pomegranate juice that I love so much. And I had it every single day. So I hope that answered
Yeah,
your.
thank you. Yeah, and we also have a question in the chat um, about what is life like for LGBTQ Israelis in the IDF, and if we can share a little bit about their experience. I know for me, when I was in Israel and had the chance to chat with a few folks, um, I got a sense that it's a moment of pride, right? That they're able to serve somewhat
Mhm.
openly, right, within the IDF. But also there's a concern about not wanting to be um, othered, but also tokenized, in a way where, um, the LGBTQ community within the IDF is being used as, props to say, oh, we are open and we are, um, this free society.
Mhm.
And so there's a fear about that.
Mhm.
But then also I was having a conversation um, with someone who was describing like the immediate aftermaths of October 7th and how there was this move, particularly within the right of Israel, to kind of equate um, LGBTQ Israelis with Hamas, and how, somehow, the LGBTQ community in Israel are a part of the enemy. And, they were using that as a fear tactic to, kind of roll back LGBTQ rights
Yeah.
in the immediate aftermath of Hamas. So I don't know if you have any stories, um, particularly revolving around, IDF soldiers.
Yeah, and I appreciate the question. I know that the IDF, especially among certain members of our community here in the United States, is vilified. There's a lot of, we've all seen the rhetoric against the Israeli military for their conduct and the way that they've operated in Gaza, the West Bank, Lebanon. I'll just take that out of it. I don't want to get into the political aspect of the situation. I just don't think that's terribly helpful. But I will say that I did have a chance to meet. I had a beer with a gay IDF soldier in Tel Aviv, and we still keep in touch. And he's been in Gaza. He went to Khan Yunis in January, so he actually showed me which we used in one of the photo essay that I did, just what it looked like on the ground in Khan Yunis, and this was in January. I mean, there was nothing left, but in our conversation, and it wasn't, we were just chatting, and the way that he spoke about the Palestinian civilians in a way that was respectful. He respected them. This is just one person's perspective, but I personally was happy to hear that he respected the Palestinian civilians in Gaza. So that was one conversation that I had, and then I went to Sagi Golan's memorial service, and I think that case in particular really highlighted inequalities that exist in Israel, especially when you talk about, soldiers and their survivors. And we had this conversation here in the U.S. a few years ago. Um, in that case, I think really galvanized folks to, this poor man lost his fiance fighting Hamas in one of the kibbutz, and he successfully lobbied lawmakers to give survivor benefits to IDF, survivors of IDF soldiers who'd fallen in battle. So that was a real victory for for folks in Israel. And unfortunately, it had to take such a horrific tragedy to make that happen. But um, yeah, I mean, the IDF part of it wasn't a significant part of my reporting, but I did have chances to, again, I said I talked with the Gadi IDF soldier who I'm still in touch with, and then I went to Sagi's memorial service. So that certainly was a part of my reporting, but the IDF per se wasn't a significant part of my reporting. It's just one of the many things that I looked at while I was on the ground there.
Thank you very much. I
Mhm.
do want to be respectful of everyone's time, and I see we are 2 minutes past the hour. And so, again, I want to thank you all for joining in what is going to be many conversations that we have at Beit Mishpacha, just about Israel, about LGBTQ life in Israel, and how we as a community here in the United States can best support the community over there. Um, and so I would like to close, Michael, with asking you a question as to what is a hope or a dream that you have for the LGBTQ community within Israel?
Oh my goodness. It's such a it seems like such a simple question, but it's so complicated. I mean, quite frankly, I think folks just want to be able to live in peace. I mean, that sounds so trite and sounds so trivial, but I think folks just want to be able to live in their country in peace. And I would say the same for Palestinians as well. Just live in peace and be able to live their lives as they see fit without this constant fear of war and, persecution, or just being able to live their lives peacefully and with dignity. I don't think it's any more complicated than that, but it's such an elusive goal as well. So hopefully one day we'll be able to go back there and see that for ourselves, but it just seems so far away. But just living in peace and dignity, that's pretty much it.
Man, may it happen. May
Let's
it
hope,
happen.
inshallah.
All right. Thank you all so very much for joining us. Thank you again, Michael, for taking time out of your
My pleasure.
schedule to chat with us. And again, this conversation is one of many that we'll have throughout the coming year, especially as we celebrate our 50th anniversary, this coming year. And so please stay tuned for more conversations. Again, thank you all for joining us, and thank you for sticking through that very um, interesting first 5 minutes of this webinar. I hope you all have a wonderful afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.